Now, to come to an end for this course section, I want to move on from the HTTP files here, where we learned important new things, to the posts.js file. And in there, we have two functions. One of them calls send data request. That's not too interesting to me here. But then we also have extract post data. And there, I expect to get a form, to be precise, an object of type form data, using the browser's built-in form data class in the end. And on that form object, here I then call the get method with some keys provided to get to extract some data from that form. And we might want to test this function as well. The question is, how can we do that? And the answer is easier than you might think. So let's add a posts.test.js file. And in there, since we have two functions in there, I'll add a test suite for extract post data here. And then register my tests in there, like this. And I now want to test as a first test, and actually as the only test here, that it should extract title and content from the provided form data. Something like this. So I expect that my extract post data function extracts these two fields. We could also test whether errors caused by the validation functions are forwarded or anything like this, but here I care about the data extraction. Now you could think that for that we need to use form data. And you could build your own form data object, but you actually need a form element, a DOM element to do that. And whilst there would be ways of making this work, you will learn more about the DOM in the next section, it might be a bit too complex here. Because in the end, all we need, if we take a closer look at this test, is an object that has a get method that accepts some key and then returns some data for every key. And again, that's the mindset I want to get you into. Look at the code you want to test and think about what behavior you want to test, and then build a testing environment that allows you to test those things. So here what we could do is we could create a test form data object, a regular object, which has a get method inside, which accepts a key or an identifier, however you want to call it, and which then returns some value. And here I'll set up some test values, some test title, which is test title, let's say, and a test content, which could be test content. And that would be the data that's inside of the form, but here we're simulating it. And then in this test form data object, I'll add a key title, which holds that test title, and a key named content, which stores the test content. And in this get method, which I'm adding, I'm returning this, referring to this object, seen from inside this method, identifier. And I'm using the square brackets notation to dynamically access these different keys depending on which identifier was passed to get. So that's now my helper object, my test form data object, which I created synthetically for my tests, because I want to test whether my function here calls this get method. I don't want to test whether the get method exists on the form data object that's built into the browser, because I know that it does. And I also don't want to test if it works correctly internally. I only want to test if I do extract that data inside of my function with help of that get method. So therefore, my dummy object, which has a get method, is all I need. And then here in my test, I can then get my extracted data by calling extract post data, which of course must be imported from posts. And this does return an object with the extracted data, hence I'm storing the data that is returned in some extra constant here. And I pass in my test form data object here, so that thereafter we can add our expectations with expect imported from vtest. And the first expectation could be that data.title should be test title, because that is the title I'm storing in the test form data. And data.content should be test content. That's my test. And again, here we're mocking something. We're replacing a value with our own fake value, so to say. But we're doing this so that we can test the actual thing we're interested in. And that is whether our function does extract the data and does return the data. That's what I'm testing here with help of my mock object. And here in this scenario, the way this function works, where it expects to get this object as an argument, we don't even need to mock replace some global value or mock replace a module. Instead, we just need to create our own dummy object, our mock object, which we pass to this function as an argument. And with this, if we run npm test again, this succeeds. And if we would change this code in here, and we would, for example, forget to return the content, and we only return the title, then our test would detect this, as it should. And here I'll, of course, bring back the content. Now you could add more tests, and if you would add more tests, one thing you might want to do is you might want to outsource this data, which is likely to get used in multiple tests. And you might want to add before each hook here, about which you learned earlier in the course, which is imported from vtest or jest. And then before every test, you might want to reset your test form data. You might want to grab this code and initially have an undefined test form data variable, and then set test form data to that starting definition here, so to this object before every test, so that if you would have a test that changes the title, for example, it would be reset after that test before the next test executes. That's just one thing you might want to do. It's of course not required if you only have one test as we have it here, but if you would have multiple tests that need the same data and that potentially manipulate the data as well, then you might want to use these hooks. So that's just another side note here.